The trouble began on a mild Saturday morning, the kind where sunlight broke through the oaks in thin gold ribbons and the neighborhood felt deceptively peaceful. The homeowner, known for his quiet habits and weekend tinkering, had grown fond of flying his compact drone, a small, lightweight quadcopter he used mostly for filming real estate projects and capturing scenic shots for his hobby channel. The HOA had no rules against casual drone use as long as it stayed within property lines and respected local aviation guidelines. He followed every rule diligently, partly out of principle, partly because this neighborhood had a reputation for drama. And that drama usually came in the form of a single person, Karen. She was the type who considered herself the guardian of community purity, a self-appointed enforcer of rules she often invented on the spot. Her complaints were legendary: grass height, mailbox color, driveway cracks, car door sounds, wind chimes that rattled the air molecules wrong, and once even an accusation that someone's cat was walking too confidently. The HOA tolerated her, but only barely. Most residents simply avoided her. The homeowner lived in the house directly behind Karen's, a small coincidence that turned out to be the spark for everything that followed. Their backyards were separated by a firm wooden privacy fence, tall enough to block any normal line of sight. But Karen had a habit of leaning over it, stepping on various objects to peer into places that weren't her concern. Several neighbors had mentioned catching her snooping, though no one ever had enough proof to challenge her on that morning. The homeowner launched his drone straight up from his backyard, letting it hover high enough to capture a panoramic sweep of rooftops, trees, and the distant lake. The flight lasted less than 10 minutes, all within his property boundaries. Afterward, he landed the drone, packed it away, and went inside with no idea that anything unusual had occurred. By early afternoon, however, a message notification blinked on his phone, an email forwarded from the HOA board. The subject line carried the familiar sting: urgent complaint, drone harassment allegation. Inside was a formal statement from Karen, claiming the drone had flown low over her yard, lingered near her patio, and violated her right to peaceful enjoyment. She described feeling targeted, monitored, and threatened. She demanded disciplinary action, fines, and an immediate ban on drone use. The claims were absurd. The drone hadn't crossed the fence. It hadn't gone near her home. The flight logs and video footage recorded every meter of elevation and movement. It was all traceable and verifiable. But the HOA, wary of the legal implications of privacy accusations, opened a formal investigation. They requested footage, written statements, and supporting evidence. The homeowner was calm at first. He had evidence: clear, time-stamped, GPS-logged footage. He submitted everything within the hour. He expected that would be the end of the matter. But Karen wasn't finished. By the next morning, she had expanded her complaint. She claimed the drone was not only flying over her yard but recording her through the windows, a severe escalation that implied criminal intent. She insisted she had visual confirmation of the drone hovering near her kitchen. She claimed she had witnesses, though none were named, and demanded immediate police involvement. Within a day, 2 officers were dispatched to the homeowner's address. They explained politely that a neighbor had filed a report alleging digital trespassing, a recently coined term referring to drone misuse. The homeowner didn't panic. Instead, he retrieved his drone's storage card and offered to show the officers every second of the footage. They agreed. The officers reviewed the video on the spot. The drone never drifted beyond the owner's yard. It never approached Karen's home. It never shifted over the fence line at all. The officers' expressions shifted from neutrality to clear frustration toward the situation, not the drone operator. They assured him no laws had been broken. The report would reflect that. When Karen learned the police had not sided with her, a new wave of accusations erupted. This time she claimed the footage had been edited. She demanded the HOA compel him to surrender the drone for forensic analysis. She suggested he was hiding earlier flights. She announced she would install her own cameras to document the harassment. Days passed, and small tensions grew into full-blown neighborhood whispers. Neighbors chatted on sidewalks, online forums, and community groups. Some found Karen's claims unbelievable. Others, familiar with her antics, simply shook their heads. But there was one thing no one had yet discussed. Something captured in the drone footage the homeowner himself hadn't noticed at first. Late one night, while reviewing the footage frame by frame to prepare a final summary for the HOA, he spotted movement near the bottom of the screen. Barely visible, almost an afterthought, Karen's head rising above the fence. At first it seemed accidental, maybe she'd stepped onto something. But a deeper review revealed a pattern. She wasn't glancing over. She was leaning, balancing, even climbing on one clip. She clearly stepped onto a garden planter. In another, she propped herself on what looked like a small ladder. At one point, she had leaned far enough forward that her upper torso crossed over onto his side of the fence line. And that wasn't all. On another day's footage, the drone caught her reaching over the fence and pushing aside objects on his property. Inspecting, fiddling, snooping. It was trespassing, captured unintentionally with timestamps to match. Suddenly, the entire situation shifted. The drone hadn't exposed her space. She had been invading his. And the only reason he had evidence was because of the very footage she claimed was incriminating him. The discovery changed everything. He knew the HOA needed to see this. More importantly, the police needed to know that Karen's allegations were not only false, but potentially a smokescreen for her own behavior. He compiled the clips, organized them chronologically, and prepared a statement outlining the timeline of events. But before he could send it, a new message arrived from a neighbor he barely knew. The neighbor reached out confidentially, saying he had seen Karen climbing the fence more than once and had captured it on his own doorbell camera. He didn't want to get involved before, but now that things had escalated, he felt compelled to speak up. The homeowner realized then that Karen hadn't just lied. She had been doing this for months, maybe longer. And now, every piece of evidence was stacking against her. He sat back, staring at the video of Karen leaning over the fence like a hawk peering into forbidden territory, completely unaware she was being recorded. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern. The question now was how to use the evidence, and how Karen would react once she learned what the footage really showed. The first chapter of the conflict was ending, but the real confrontation had only just begun. The morning after discovering the incriminating footage, the homeowner woke with a sense of calm resolve, the kind that comes when a situation finally shifts in your favor after weeks of uncertainty. The sunlight filtering into his office felt different, cleaner, sharper, as if the world had quietly aligned itself. He knew what he needed to do, and for the first time since Karen had launched her accusations, he finally felt in control. That he began by organizing everything with meticulous care. Every drone clip was exported, cataloged, and timestamped. He included the flight logs, showing altitude, GPS coordinates, and automated pathing data. He added the slow-motion sequences that clearly captured Karen leaning over the fence, using various objects to elevate herself high enough to peer into spaces that were not hers to look at. He even included the clip where her hand crossed fully over the fence line, disturbing items on his side. Alongside this video evidence, he compiled the neighbor's doorbell footage into a separate folder. The video, though grainy, clearly showed Karen climbing onto an overturned planter to peek over the fence. In another clip, she balanced herself on a small step stool, wobbling slightly but determined to peer into the homeowner's yard. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the dates of her most aggressive accusations. Once everything was organized, he crafted a formal report. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't vindictive. It simply laid out the facts chronologically, logically, irrefutably. He concluded the document with a firm request that the HOA dismiss Karen's complaints and that steps be taken to address her ongoing pattern of harassment and trespassing. The HOA acknowledged receipt of the file almost immediately. Within hours, a board member emailed stating that an emergency hearing would be scheduled to review the evidence. This alone signaled that the situation had evolved beyond a petty neighborhood squabble. The HOA rarely held emergency sessions, and never for anything that didn't carry serious implications. Word spread quietly through the neighborhood. People exchanged glances while taking out trash, whispered over fences, and typed cautiously in community group chats. The story had become bigger than a drone. It was now a test of how far Karen's influence could stretch, and whether the HOA would finally hold her accountable. On the day of the hearing, the community center's conference room felt unusually tense. There were no spectators allowed, but board members moved about briskly, organizing papers and adjusting seating. The homeowner was escorted to one table, his evidence prepared on a laptop. Karen was guided to another, her expression tight with silent indignation. She carried a thick stack of printed papers and a small notebook, her attempt to project seriousness and authority. Though no spoken words would be recounted here, the atmosphere made the dynamics clear. Karen presented first, confident in her performance. She gestured often, flipping pages, pointing to printed pictures, though none showed anything more incriminating than her own blurred images of a drone far above the tree line. She looked at the board expectantly after every piece of her presentation, anticipating validation she had grown accustomed to demanding. But for the first time, she didn't receive it. The board members remained expressionless, only taking notes. No nods of agreement, no murmurs of sympathy. Then it was the homeowner's turn. He played the drone footage slowly and methodically. Every second of video was crystal clear. The drone never crossed the fence. His camera faced outward, upward, anywhere except toward Karen's property. The GPS logs corroborated every movement. The board members leaned in, focusing with newfound seriousness. Then came the footage Karen never expected. Clip after clip revealed her looming above the fence line, her movements unmistakable. Her posture, her actions, her intent. They couldn't be interpreted any other way. She wasn't a victim trying to protect her privacy. She was an aggressor repeatedly breaching someone else's. The footage of her arm reaching fully over the fence landed especially hard, the movement tense and unmistakably intrusive. When the neighbor's doorbell videos were shown, the board members exchanged glances for the first time. Not uncertainty, but a quiet shock at the pattern emerging before them. They whispered among themselves, flipping through pages of HOA bylaws that outlined boundaries, conduct expectations, and rules regarding harassment and trespassing. Karen's entire narrative had begun to unravel. The final blow came when the timeline chart was presented. Every time she had filed a complaint corresponded almost exactly to the days she had been climbing the fence, leaning, snooping, and crossing boundaries. The board didn't need anyone to draw the conclusion aloud. The evidence spoke for itself. When the hearing concluded, the board excused both parties and informed them that a formal ruling would be delivered within 48 hours. But even without the official decision, it was clear which way the scales had tipped. Karen left the room stiff-backed, her posture no longer triumphant but brittle, defensive, and silently furious. The homeowner returned home feeling lighter than he had in weeks. For the first time since Karen's accusations began, the pressure on his shoulders had eased. He spent the evening quietly, reviewing nothing, thinking about nothing. The matter was out of his hands now, resting with people who had finally seen the truth. But peace didn't last for long. That night, motion lights outside flickered to life. The homeowner glanced at the feed from his security camera and saw Karen pacing in her own yard, moving erratically, her steps sharp and agitated. She appeared to be muttering to herself, clutching her notebook, flipping through pages rapidly as if searching for something she had misplaced. She approached the fence several times but didn't climb it. Instead, she hovered near it in restless circles, as though unsure if she should continue her old habits or abandon them before she crossed another line. The next afternoon, the HOA ruling arrived. Though the details will unfold in the next chapter, one line stood out immediately. An official notice stating that due to the severity of the evidence, the HOA was legally obligated to forward the case to local law enforcement for further review. And just like that, the conflict had evolved from neighborhood drama to a matter with real consequences. Karen's false accusations had not only failed, they had backfired harder than anyone anticipated. The third chapter would not be about proving innocence anymore. It would be about accountability. And Karen was about to face hers. The HOA ruling landed like a quiet but definitive hammer. It arrived in neutral language, written in the detached tone of official procedure, yet beneath every line was the unmistakable weight of consequence. The board concluded that the drone operator had violated no HOA rule, no privacy boundary, and no local ordinance. All accusations made against him were formally dismissed. But the ruling didn't stop there. The board acknowledged the video evidence demonstrating repeated instances of boundary invasion, Karen leaning, climbing, and reaching across the property line. They cited specific bylaws she had violated, documenting each incident with timestamps pulled directly from the drone's footage and the neighbor's doorbell recordings. By the end of the document, one sentence made everything shift into a new reality. Due to the nature of the documented behavior, this matter has been referred to local law enforcement for further action. The homeowner read the line twice, absorbing the gravity. What began as an annoying accusation had unraveled into something far bigger. The board's decision meant they weren't just washing their hands of the matter, they were actively pushing it into criminal territory. The following afternoon, a patrol vehicle parked discreetly down the block. Two officers walked to Karen's door, knocking with measured professionalism. From a distance, neighbors peeked through curtains or watched from porches, curiosity barely concealed. The homeowner didn't need to hear the conversation to understand what was happening. This time, the officers weren't responding to her claims. They were investigating her actions. Karen answered the door with her usual rigid poise, but as the officers explained the reason for their visit, her posture shifted. Motion lights from the homeowner's camera later revealed her making wide, defensive gestures. Her expression contorted in disbelief. She attempted to lead the officers around the side of her house, waving towards the fence as though pointing out some invisible crime. But the officers remained steady, returning again and again to the documents in their hands. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes before the officers stepped back, thanked her, and walked away. Karen remained at the doorstep long after they had gone, her face frozen between indignation and dread. She shut the door slowly, almost reluctantly, as if afraid of what closing it symbolized. Over the next few days, the social atmosphere of the neighborhood transformed. Karen had long thrived on the perception that she held moral authority, but that image crumbled quickly once word spread of the HOA ruling. Neighbors who once avoided conflict with her now kept their distance for different reasons, not fear but disapproval. Small clusters formed at the ends of driveways, exchanging clipped summaries of what they knew. Words like trespassing, evidence, and investigation drifted through the air like rumors that finally had teeth. The homeowner noticed a change too. People who had rarely spoken to him offered sympathetic nods or brief greetings. One neighbor left a small note at his door expressing support, saying they were relieved someone had finally stood up to Karen's relentless behavior. Another quietly admitted they had endured their own share of her meddling but never felt they had proof strong enough to challenge her. This shift didn't sit well with Karen. From behind her windows, she watched the subtle changes with a growing sense of isolation. Her blinds twitched frequently, moving just enough to suggest she was monitoring everything, taking mental notes, trying to anticipate what would happen next. The authority she once wielded so confidently had dissolved, leaving behind a hollow space she didn't know how to fill. A week later, the homeowner received a call from a detective assigned to the case. The tone was measured and professional. The detective had reviewed the footage, the timeline, and the statements. He confirmed what the homeowner already suspected. There was enough evidence to pursue a formal charge if the district attorney chose to proceed. The detective explained that Karen's actions, especially leaning over the fence and physically reaching into another person's property, met the criteria for misdemeanor trespassing. The fact that she had filed knowingly false police reports only intensified the severity. But the detective also mentioned something unexpected. Karen had already been interviewed, and during the conversation, she attempted to justify her actions by claiming she was monitoring potential safety hazards. She insisted she had a right to oversee the neighborhood's behavior and that the drone threatened her privacy. When confronted with the footage showing her climbing, leaning, and reaching, she allegedly became defensive, repeating that she felt entitled to check because she didn't trust anyone around her. Her behavior, the detective explained, was a textbook example of escalating paranoia mixed with an inflated sense of authority, something the legal system viewed seriously when paired with false accusations. Still, the detective emphasized that the next steps rested with the district attorney. Charges weren't guaranteed, but the possibility loomed. In the days that followed, Karen's presence around the neighborhood diminished almost entirely. Where she once patrolled the block daily, she now stayed indoors, curtains perpetually drawn. The quietness around her home felt unnatural, as if the house itself had withdrawn from the community. Meanwhile, the homeowner felt the tension slowly dissipate. He continued flying his drone, carefully, respectfully, always within the law, but with a new sense of empowerment rooted not in defiance, but in truth. His footage hadn't been a weapon. It had been a mirror, revealing behavior that had long gone unchecked. Then, one crisp morning, an official letter arrived from the district attorney's office. It stated that Karen would not be facing criminal charges, but she had been issued a formal warning, placed into the public record. The letter also confirmed that she would be required to attend a conflict resolution program and that her pattern of behavior had been documented for future reference. It wasn't a dramatic arrest or a public spectacle, but it was far from nothing. It was a permanent mark on her record, an official recognition that her actions were unacceptable and unlawful. It meant any future false report or boundary violation would carry swift consequences. And for the neighborhood, it was enough. The community gradually resumed its rhythm. For the first time in years, residents felt safe from unwanted surveillance and baseless complaints. Even the HOA, often criticized for inconsistency, gained a measure of respect for handling the situation responsibly. As for Karen, her influence faded quietly. Her self-appointed role as neighborhood watchdog dissolved as quickly as it had formed. She stepped out less often, and when she did, she avoided eye contact, no longer eager to impose her presence on others. The fence remained untouched. The planters and step stools vanished, and the drone, once the center of conflict, continued to rise above the neighborhood, recording not drama, but peace. The homeowner often reflected on the entire ordeal, recognizing that the drone had captured more than just footage. It had exposed a truth that had lingered beneath the surface for a long time, a truth that now, finally, had been addressed. And with that, the story came to its natural end, quiet, steady, and resolved. The neighborhood breathed easier, Karen's reign had ended, and the homeowner reclaimed not just his privacy, but his right to live without fear of false accusations.